Well, welcome everyone to another edition of Sustainable LatAm, a podcast that looks at geopolitics, politics, economic development, environmental developments, all sorts of issues in Latin America. So I'm happy to say hello to my two partners in discussion, Alberto Souviron, who looks largely at the political and social aspects of developments in Latin America, Julian Seydoux, who's more of an economic-focused analyst, myself, also a journalist. And the big news for us today is that we are really happy, I should say, we're really happy to welcome Débora Toledo, who is an international director and partner for Grupo Lacer, a private equity group that specializes, among other things, in financing agro-industry. So we've got a big subject today. It's the free trade agreement between Mercosur, that's Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay, and the European Union on the other hand, which has taken no less than a quarter of a century to negotiate and is still not absolutely there. I should mention there is a legal challenge within the EU that could delay things, but lots of other things are happening. So where I'd like to start is with a really, really simple question that tries to sort of focus us on what this is all about. And I'd be happy to start with Débora. And the question for all of you, I'll come around to the other two, is it important and why is it important? Simple as that. Débora.
Of course, it is very important, but I will ask you to remember, everybody to do an exercise to remember the world, how the world was like 30 years ago. China was only beginning to gain relevance. It was undergoing a major economic transition, opening marketing and also integrating with more deeply into global trade. Europe was betting on economic integration with its internal market, and United States under President Bill Clinton was experiencing an expanding economy. And over the past 3 decades, much has happened. Okay, almost like 8 Olympic Games, 4 popes, and Brazil, of course, became one of the 5-time world champion in football. And it was in that world that 3 decades ago that a massive agreement, Mercosur and European Union, started in a slow process. So the first memorandum, to understand, someone just explaining how was before and to have an idea how is important today. So the first memorandum was signed in 1995. You guys can correct me. And the plan was to sign everything on 2000. But the severe economic crisis between 2000 and 2002 put all on hold. So negotiations was under hopeful now will fully happen, moved until 2010, okay? And then now after these 3 years of 30 years of negotiation, setback, so now we can see the last January 9, European Commission countries had approved the document, okay? And to understand this, what is important, why is it so important? Because it's the largest trade and investment partnership that ever negotiated. So we can talk about around 720 million consumers, 450 from Europe, and 270 million in South America.
So, Julian, do you agree that it is important?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Débora is saying completely correctly. It's a huge deal for 2 big economies, one ancient one in Europe, and a growing one in Latin America and in South America. And I think it's really strategic In many ways, it will open lots of opportunities for trades. I think it's very good for the Mercosur countries, and it's also very good for the European Union, because we'll need to have access to key strategic resources that are present in the Mercosur countries. So absolutely, this is a big deal, and one that can, it's very hard to see what else is out there that can compete against these trading blocks at this stage. You have a fast-moving geopolitical context where America or the US is removing itself from its trading partners, where China has been isolated for a while, but also has been trying to get outside of its borders, but for historical purposes has always been difficult. The Chinese have not, for thousands of years, have not been going much abroad. So absolutely, between the EU and Mercosur countries, it is a big deal, as Débora said.
And my colleagues here probably know me for being sometimes a bit of a pessimist. So, Alberto, the same question for you, but let me just drop in that by calculations that have been made, the free trade agreement will increase Europe's GDP by 0.1%. It'll do better for Mercosur. It will increase their GDP by about 0.3% in the years running to 2032. So is it a lot of talk for rather small percentages of gains?
Okay, I will jump in there, and I will play a little bit of devil's advocate and a little bit of paraphrasing you, Andrew, a little bit with the pessimism, but also a little bit of optimism around that. It is important. If we're talking 0.9% of the GDP, when you see the percentage could be small, but when you see numbers, it's huge. It's quite a huge amount of money. So we cannot deny. But I will say this more from a political perspective. I think this agreement is really important for Mercosur and its position in Latin America is really important. But for Europe, it's critical. And I think Europe is the one who is missing the big opportunity here if continues stalling this agreement. We will talk later about this, but with the latest move of bringing the whole agreement to the legal challenge and delaying at least for 2 years more, I don't think they are making them favor. Julian and Débora are right. They're saying it's a huge agreement. It's opened a lot of opportunities for both regions. But in the current geopolitical context, following the history of what Débora says, the world is completely different today than it was 25 years ago. So for Europe, especially in the current context, with the tensions with China, with the competition with the US, the changes that is going around, that would be a big opportunity for Europe to establish, continue establishing as a global power. But with all these delays, it's a stake. In the case of Mercosur, I think it's a big opportunity. It's going to be a big miss for the countries of Mercosur in terms of a market. But Mercosur has other options at this stage because the world has changed. So we have to ask ourselves, it's really important, it's very important for Mercosur, and I think it's more important for the European Union to get this agreement going. And for the geopolitical game that we have been analyzing recently, that would be a game changer, but we will see what is going to come later.
Can I come back to Débora? From your point of view, working with the private sector and with financing, what is the most exciting thing about the deal?
First of all, I think it's a strategic moment for Latin America and Europe to work together. I'm talking about both sides, especially when we talk about private sector, because when we see what Trump is doing with tariffs, we see that Europe can get tariffs too, and Brazil as well, and Latin America, other countries as well, especially Brazil, of course, and my background is more about Brazil. And talking with this perspective, I think is a way now is the moment to the private sector look to the old continent and work together, especially not just like in our side, we can sell more beef, sugar, rice, honey, soy, coffee, orange juice, tropical fruits. But we would like to import more cars. We'd like to work closely with other industries in Europe, especially talking about pharmaceuticals. And I see that geopolitics and the private sector working together in the same side now, that is very necessary now.
I can't resist asking, we're all aware that there are general elections in Brazil in October this year. It's likely to be for the center-left Lula again. But what about the center-right? Will that candidate, who might be called Bolsonaro or might not be called Bolsonaro, will the Brazilian center-right be happy with the Mercosur European Union deal, or will they want to negotiate it in a more protectionist direction?
Also, I work in the private sector. I see politicians as an opportunity to buy or sell. I see like they make price for us. Both sides, I can tell, especially Bolsonaro, he started to do a negotiation on 2019. You can correct me as well if I'm wrong, but he was working on this deal as well. Of course, without some quotes that we have now related to agri-sector. And I think it's a deal above politics. It's not a government stuff. It is a state issue. And we see as an opportunity to export more and also to improve our development. Because when we talk about technology, I think importing is also important for us to develop new things together, like technology. And I think that's what I'm saying. Like politicians, doesn't matter side, they would like to do business. They need the economy grow. So I think from looking the history as well, this kind of deal is like a state issue.
Okay. Julian, could I ask you, from an investment point of view, is the world, apart from Donald Reagan, happy that trade is good for economies, even if your bilateral trade deficit might go up? Because it seems that Donald Trump is what I'm trying to say. It seems that he believes that trade is win-lose, not win-win. So my question to you is are there enough politicians who believe it's win-win?
That's a good question. Well, it depends on which side they're talking about. Trade is for business in general, as Débora says, the less friction you have, the better it is. And friction increases costs, and there's nothing more painful than costs if you run a business. So there should be, from private sectors of both sides, there should be ample support for this trade agreement to go through. For the politician side, it's harder. It's much harder because, especially in Europe, you have the rise of the populist politicians. You have to take into account any little stakeholders, and in particular, we have famously the farmers across the EU who are rebelling against the agreement, and therefore pushing the parties to oppose it. and make themselves very much heard. Now, we know that generally they can carry much more weight than the actual economic power that they have. So, we've seen in the UK, we've seen, for instance, during the Brexit era, all the talks about fishers and versus the rest of the economic union that existed. So this can be very disruptive on the European side, and we can see the impact that it had on the long-term trade deal that has been well on the works, and could really derail it. The thing here is to remember, I think again, is that maybe the recent action of the US administration, whether it's in Latin America through Venezuela or talks about Greenland, is really changing some of the discourse that you see in Europe. And in that discourse change, a trade agreement with Latin America, with Mercosur, access to their natural resources, whether it's the ability of land, forests, minerals, of course, rare earth, which is plentiful across all the countries, but also as energy superpowers, whether in Brazil, Argentina, or even Bolivia is about to be, of course, being for a member, is you have plenty of energy, which is really key for economies in the European Union. In addition to that, you have opportunities, healthcare, infrastructure, you have education, and you have a demographic which is favorable for the European Union, in the sense that South American countries have a much lower median age than the European Union. And so there's so much at stake, and strategically it just makes so much sense for the EU to enter into an agreement with Mercosur. And that at some stage, and you can see from the spectrum of politicians, Germany, I think, is moving towards really very much towards understanding that it needs to have access to all of this. For the German cars, selling it to Brazil is great, but you need the raw ingredients as well. If we are moving towards electric vehicles everywhere, you probably need lithium and all kinds of other rare metals. And you can either go to Africa, which is where everyone is going at some stage, which is really difficult, or you can go and deal with the trade bloc, which is growing and where you have access to all of it. And sometimes maybe you can have priority access. So I think here you have a really imperative part for industries to support this thing, and this will influence the politicians as well.
Alberto, what else can Mercosur do? Or is this one big deal enough for the next 25 years? Are there other deals it could make?
No, definitely it's going. And I think actually the Mercosur is already moving forward. It's not waiting for the agreement with the European Union gets through. So far, sources, if you see sources, they are already actively negotiating with Canada, with the EFTA, which is the other Europe, with the big Asian economic powers in Asia, like India, Indonesia, and Vietnam, and also highly active relations with the Middle East countries, especially the United Arab Emirates. If you remember in a former episode when we were talking with Jose Maria Linares of Santander, he was saying that Latin America is diversifying, especially in the area of energy, but also in terms of investments, what is coming to the region. And the Middle Eastern countries are playing a key role. They are going and see the opportunities. So for Mercosur, that's why I was saying at the beginning, going with an agreement with the European Union is huge, great, important, a huge market, but we have to put in perspective that is not the only one. And I think the European Union, especially Brazil and Argentina, knows this really well, and they are accelerating now. And in the current geopolitical context, especially from Brazil, Débora, you can correct me, Brazil is trying to get away of the dichotomy of being in the middle between Brazil, the US and China. So it's diversifying. That's why you can see that they are going with agreements with Canada, the FTA, as I mentioned, other Asian countries, and the Middle East. So just to make a short answer, there is plenty of opportunities for the Mercosur from now on. And I will finish with that. The agreement and the text of the agreement that has been using for this with the European Union, actually it serves as a base for Mercosur to go and negotiate with other countries with the logic that says if we manage to get agreement with the European Union with all the strict conditions in terms of environment and the other restrictions that they have, definitely you can do business with us because we managed to overcome all of this with one of the regions that are really restrictive in terms of regulations on many areas. So the logic for Mercosur says if we manage to do that with Europe, definitely we can do that with other countries that are less demanding, like Canada or Asia or the Middle East.
Débora, I've got a question for you. Part of making a success out of a free trade agreement is to have companies and economic sectors where you're competitive. And in Brazil's case, there is really, I suppose, a need for investment in infrastructure to reduce some of the costo brasileiro, the local costs of things like transport and other types of infrastructure. Is that investment money available? Will people invest in Brazil and particularly in Brazilian infrastructure?
Oh, thank you for this question. Yes, for sure. I can guarantee to you. So that's what I'm doing here in Europe. I'm fundraising for a few projects in Brazil that our group is financing. And I can see a lot of appetite for direct investments, especially when we talk about the infrastructure, because when we talk about the situation in the markets today, infrastructure from the investors' perspective, is like a very good moment for it. And why Brazil? I can talk by my experience that we had raised it around 100 million in the last 9 months here in UK. And what they say, why Brazil? Because Brazil, we have an upside very, very huge now. So we need, when we talk about infrastructure, pretty much everything. And we are already, how can I say, we are already disbureaucratized, I don't know the word, sorry. We are already making things easier when we talk about bureaucracy, because Brazil was the only emerging country that had approved at least 5 big reforms. And we had approved the pension fund reform, we had approved the saneamento, so it's related to infrastructure reform, so to facilitate to raise capital. And when we talk about the European perspective, Europe was responsible to invest around 40% in Brazilian infrastructure last year. So we see a lot of appetite, and especially as well because infrastructure to export, and because, people needs to eat, the world needs to eat. And the problem we have now with the Brazilian price, the commodity price, is the infrastructure. So from the investor's perspective, is like a very good moment and a very good upside for them.
And I'll ask you this, but I'll also ask Alberto and Julian. The environmental protection played a really big part in the negotiations, and there are a lot of, and still are a lot of, European demands about making Brazilian commodities traceable, working out that they aren't linked to deforestation, and there is quite a lot of regulation around that, and the European Union is known, is perhaps notorious for the regulation it's got. So the question is environmental protection likely to get in the way of the development of the free trade agreement, or is it something that can be managed?
Oh, can I answer that before you,
Yes.
Roberto?
Go ahead.
I really like this subject because one thing is narrative, another thing is reality. I'd like to ask who is listening and you guys, do you really think it's possible, for example, to plant soybeans in Amazon? How come? So I'd like to talk about the cost of infrastructure. So there's no stones over there. There's no roads over there. So 50% of the cost when we talk about commodities exporting is infrastructure. So how someone would plant in a poor area when we talk about quality of the earth over there, so without no infrastructure. So what I'm trying to explain that who does this is not the big player who is exporting it, because to export we need certifications, as you had mentioned. So certifications, nobody who export would like to have this kind of issue and problems. So we need to see what is narrative and what is business. What is the reality? The reality is we cannot compare like small farmers or people that are like destroying Amazon because of illegal mining, because drug trafficking. We cannot compare with big companies that are exporting. Doesn't make, so the thing is, I think there is a lot of things behind this narrative. And also I can understand, because how they will compete with us. Some regions in Brazil, you can plant 3 crops a year, and few places in Europe you have like half of the year frozen. So I understand, but the thing is, it's a good opportunity because it makes price as well. That's why Brazil is so cheap. I think we are not very good on marketing. We are very good on partying, talking about our culture. When we talk about marketing ourselves in the world, I think our Brazilian soft power, like music, I really think we are very good at this. But to talk what is happening in Brazil, I think we are very bad. Well, that's why we have this kind of issue with this narrative.
Alberto, following on the same question, really, do the Mercosur partners, have they got the right balance on environmental protection versus red tape?
Let's go back a little bit of what Débora was saying, narrative versus reality. And I will going to be a little bit controversial in that area. I honestly think that when we're talking about environment, all the challenges and opportunities that are going around the Mercosur countries are huge. There are problems, that's for sure. Débora has mentioned the problem, poverty. There is problems of the certification. There is problem of deforestation that has to be addressed. And I think, to be fair, I think none of the countries of Mercosur and those who are candidates like Bolivia are ignoring that question. If you ask me, and I see the agreement with the Mercosur and all the environmental elements, I always have thinking, and I'm going to go in that line with Lula, that is not a problem for Mercosur. Actually, it's an opportunity because it can make the production costs and all the elements even better and more efficient in the long term if a good deal is being made. Europe has put a lot of strict barriers going around that, and I think Mercosur has been shown properly done that says, hey, check what is the reality, what is the reality of these countries, and what can really done in a sustainable way. I don't think big exporter companies, as Débora says, are trying to shoot in their foot by destroying the source of their economy. In that case, like let's say soy production, it has to be done in a sustainable way. And I think a good dialogue with Europe in that case, that was one of the clauses that said Europe can provide certain know-how that helps to work even in a more sustainable way for Europe, for Mercosur countries, that I see in part of the agreement. Good work. On the other side, I will sound a little bit nationalist, but I will say, I really think that Brazil, Argentina are, if we were talking in terms of agribusiness, big powers. They know how to do these things in a way. So I don't think they are going to work back their business. Nobody wins by an environment destroyed. So I think they are trying to work around that. But on the other side, I have to admit, there are a lot of challenges inside the Mercosur countries and in the whole world in general to deal with the challenges of environment. But I don't think this is going to come but just by putting certain limitations that is going to simply stop developing more agreements. From my point of view, a good free trade agreement actually can benefit the development of sustainable production in the future and in the long term.
Julian, I've got a simple question for you. In our discussion so far, are we missing any important points, any big points that should be discussed in terms of Mercosur and the EU?
No, not really. So I just want to come back to the sustainability factors. I am, the world has changed a lot, and Alberto and I worked with the London School of Economics. We produced a paper specifically on the sustainability provisions of in the Mercosur agreement a couple of years ago, and whatever was written there is still completely valid. At the time, we also had spoken to Ambassador Barbosa from Brazil, who was advocating for the for the Mercosur agreement to go through and the opportunities there. And I think today what is happening is that we are in a world of realpolitik, whereby these things, the sustainability barriers of entry that the EU was putting before were really important to protect in a free trade world where everyone was, in a globalized world. And today things have changed massively, and that means that actually, if you start putting barriers as for entry for themselves, they will start putting barriers for that, for their industries when they go and invest in Brazil or Argentina or wherever, because that will drive up costs for themselves in terms of the supply chain that they may want to construct. So I think in the reality of business, these things will have to be managed. There's some enforcement mechanisms which we analyzed in the past, which we thought were pretty weak altogether already in a couple of years ago, when ESG and sustainability were big words. Today, global competition is just pushing these considerations somewhat aside into let's make sure that we can secure supply chain, and we can do business, and we can do investments in each other's countries. So I think this is the reality of the Mercosur agreement, is in the context of these geopolitical factors, whether you have competition for the EU from China, from the US, who is actively probably going into Mercosur countries. I actually brought a book which I think Alberto knows very well, and you may remember, but this, I don't know if anyone can see it. This is
there.
Brazil, the new superpower, is the new American.
Yes.
If you remember well, at the back of it, you have economists, but you also have the President Donald Trump and Peter Thiel. And this book was written in 2011. So do I think that Brazil is really in the eye of the US administration? I think it's really, really, really present in their mind, and I think we are going to, there's probably negotiation already taking place in the region. So that's why for the EU it's just necessary to start moving to go ahead with this country, because America has already claimed that we are back into the what is it, Don room doctrine or whatever it is. But for Mercosur country and particularly for Brazil, who is potentially a superpower by itself, it's really important to diversify its avenues as well. And as we said, trade with the Chinese, trade with the Europeans, do business with the Americans. That's the key for prosperity for the Mercosur countries.
I would like to complement a little to what Julian said, very quick on that, with just paraphrasing what President Lula told, the reaction of President Lula after the European Parliament put the legal bloc, sent the agreement to the European Court of Justice. He says, be careful, the patience of Brazil has a limit. Okay, and I think that's a point that we have to make in part. That's what I was trying to say at the beginning is Europe. I will put it that way. Mercosur really is going to benefit with the agreement with the European Union, and they know that, as Débora says, there is a lot of European investments in infrastructure. So it's really important for Latin America and for Mercosur to get that deal. But from my point of view, Europe, and Julian just says, Europe needs, it's more important for Europe now to a little bit, to a check of reality and says, we need to work with Mercosur and open our opportunities. I will be a little bit dramatic on that area, but for Europe at stake is its position as a global player, because credibility is at stake if this don't go through. Most important is that it's going to show that the European Union is not capable to do any global business without before being derailed by internal politics. That's the image that is going outside at this moment. So I think for Europe, it's going to be very important to begin to look and try to find a way to sort it out this. But they have to do it really soon, because as President Lula says, the patience is a limit, and Europe is the one who has to lose more on this. And I already mentioned that the Mercosur countries are already moving to other agreements. We were discussing just in other episodes how Latin America is growing up in this new geopolitical context that we are living today. There are a lot of risks, definitely, but a lot of opportunities for Latin America is going around. And Brazil is awakening literally as this big power that is really open, trying to diversify its business all around in order to become less dependent of these dualities of global powers. That's the geopolitical aspect. There are a lot of work to do, but that's how I'm seeing this agreement at this moment.
Can I compliment, please?
Of course.
I'd like to mention that the United States now is like looking to Latin America with different eyes, and everybody can see after, for example, after Venezuela, and it's not a secret anymore that United States now is like investing a lot of attention, at least, and then money as well in Latin America. And for us, I can see we are in a position that we are doing business with China, United States, and when we talk about the European Union and Mercosur, I'd like to analyze what Europe will lose to do agreement with countries that free trade agreement with countries that produce commodities, most most of us, it's like essentially commodities, and you guys will export to us manufacturing with a lot of value. And Europe now is facing tariffs, huge tariffs with United States. Europe now is like facing huge problems with Chinese manufacturing here. And when we talk about cars, for example, Chinese cars, like electric cars everywhere. And so Latin America is like a frontier for you to export it. And I'm telling you, like from our perspective, a lot of people in Brazil saying that maybe this trade is not good for us because we will export commodities and they will bring a lot of competition to compete with an industry that's not that developed.
Yes.
So I'd like to bring this view on the table. Yeah.
Okay.
Well done. Yes. I've got my eye on the time. We've been talking for 3/4 of an hour, so I'm thinking might be close to the time for summing up, and ask each of you just to sort of make a few key points. I mean, one way of doing it would be to say Donald Trump took office in 2025, and in 2029 he will be standing down, replaced by we're not sure whom. But I could ask each of you to say, what is your perspective on the year 2029 or 2030? Will the Mercosur EU agreement be a proven success, or will it still be struggling? I don't know who wants to start off on that.
Andrew, you're making the question of the million. It's really playing with the crystal ball, but I will jump in the area. If I'm going on the optimist way, I would say that Europe is going to make sense at the end of the day, and it's going to try to find a way to overcome and get an agreement. But I don't think it's going to come on easily around. There is a lot of risk and can be derailed, but there is an opportunity. I don't think, and I will put it there where we're talking about the internal politics of the European Union, I don't think that Germany, especially Germany, but also the northern countries and Spain, are going to sit down and let this agreement going down in history and see Europe basically become of the threats that Donald Trump has made to the European Union, to becoming an irrelevant organism in the future. So I don't think Europe is going to do that. I think they are going to try to, in a way, arrange that. On the other side, I think Mercosur, although has a lot of opportunities now beyond Europe, still needs a good agreement with Europe. And here I'm going to talk also in philosophical terms. But we're seeing the way that America is seeing Latin America is a transactional way with a win-lose. While the way that the agreement with the Mercosur and the European Union comes actually was seen in a way of win-win. And I think these two philosophies are going to be important to see what is going to happen in 2029. And when I say for the Americans win-lose, it's because it's a transactional way of works, basically. So that's the challenge. I cannot say that in 2029 we are going to have an agreement. I think there is a big opportunity, and I really hope for a more open and sustainable world in the future that the agreement come true, but goes through a lot of challenges. And I'm going to mention just what a friend has mentioned yesterday. We're living at global level in the world of chaos. We have a word in Bolivia that is very, very indigenous, that is called chenco, that is absolute chaos, everything entangled, basically. And that's the world that we're living today. But inside this entanglement that are going on, a lot of opportunities are going around that. So we will see what's going to happen.
Perfect. Julian?
So the question is the success.
The question is, if we're looking at 2029, how successful do you think Mercosur will be by that stage, or I should say the Mercosur European Union agreement?
Well, I think it will be a success. And I mean, let me be bullish about this. I think it will be a great success. It'll be a great success for Mercosur countries, definitely. Opening up the opportunities and investments coming in, and the market, the second or third largest market in the world, accessing a variety of goods. And for the EU, yes, it will be a success as well, because it will have access to strategic resources and potential partners that is needed in a competitive global world. And so I think that when I think about what if I think about what people need, I think China needs more than anyone else to be fed by Mercosur countries. So all the agribusiness can be sold to the Chinese. There's plenty to go through. And I think the Americans probably need a lot of energy and rare earth minerals, and this is why the US and EU will probably compete or be an ally, who knows, for the same resources. But again, there's plenty to go there, and there's plenty also for people to do business all together. So I think being a win-win is always a better thing. Doing business on the other two sides. There's also a strong European culture in some of the Mercosur countries, so underlying everything. So there should be lots of things happening there. And also we heard from Jose Maria Linares of Santander, they're investing across infrastructures and so on, which is exactly what Débora was mentioning, the opportunities in Brazil. And I think there will be plenty in everywhere across the Mercosur agreement. So it's not just industries, it's also banking, it's also financial services, it's also military complex. Europe does produce military equipment, and as global powers become a bit more armed themselves, then Latin American countries, especially following what happened in Venezuela, will probably start buying more weapons themselves, and Europe does have its industries there. So I think I'm positive here, and as you know, Andrew, I'm pretty bullish altogether for South America.
Yeah. Débora, we're looking for your summary, but I'm tempted to say that in terms of Brazilian manufacturing, there are companies like Embraer that are competing on a world scale. Do you see that continuing?
I do think, Embraer is like, I'm an investor over there. I really like that you had mentioned it. Yeah, but it's just, how can I say, Brazilian market in the world is like around 2% when we talk about manufacturing. Only 2% what we have in the world now. I really think that Europe needs everything about the Mercosur and European Union trade. I think everything we need to see if Europe will realize that you guys are in trouble first. Everything. So depends if you realize how much trouble is Europe now. When we talk about Russia and Ukraine conflict, Ukraine used to be the food security player in Europe, right? And now we have this problem, right? And we don't know how Ukraine situation will be. So first of all, people need to eat. We're talking about food security. So even if the French farmers doesn't want to compete with us because the government give them a lot of subsidies. One thing is reality. Another thing is how I say to you is narrative. And also Europe needs to realize that we have tariffs on the game now. So who they will export? So now we can say that everything depends. The sense of reality in Europe now to understand that who needs more this deal is Europe. Honestly, Brazil is still playing, or Brazil and Latin and Mercosur, like Argentina is doing well with the United States. Doesn't matter what, how can I say, people need to eat. We have other markets to export. And when we talk agriculture, just 20% goes to Europe. And if we do trade deal with you, that agribusiness won't compete directly because we will have some quotas, and only 1%, something like that. I don't remember really well. But everything depends, this sense of reality, that Europe has, because when we talk about food, when we talk about Putin, when we talk about Trump, do you guys really realize that the situation of the whole continent has changed? I don't know. So for us, we can sell to United States, to China, and other markets as well, Middle East.
I think we've come to the point of saying goodbye until we speak again next time.